Part 1. Arrival and Strange Local Superstitions. From the Journal of Miss Adelaide Thornfield, September 3, 1893. The stagecoach journey that delivered me to Timber Creek was far more harrowing than any advertisement for teaching positions in Montana Territory had suggested. After 3 days of incessant jostling over rutted trails that scarcely deserved the title of roads, we nearly met our demise mere miles from my destination. The horses, steady throughout our journey across open plains, suddenly reared and screamed as we rounded the bend that first revealed Devil's Peak. I caught only a glimpse of the mountain. It was imposing and jagged against the sky and seemed to draw the clouds around its summit like a cloak. Then I was thrown against the side of the coach as our driver struggled for control. My trunks arrived somewhat worse for wear, much like myself. The local men who helped unload them avoided meeting my eyes and offered only the briefest of nods when I expressed my gratitude. Their haste to be away from the newly arrived schoolteacher spoke volumes about the reception I might expect. The women at least offered perfunctory welcomes, though their smiles never quite fulfilled their eyes as they assessed my Eastern attire and posture. How quickly they dispersed when Mrs. Holloway stepped forward to offer me boarding. I cannot decide if their deference to the widow stems from respect or something closer to wariness. Mrs. Holloway's home sits at the edge of town. It is neat and sturdy, with a view of both the main street and the wilderness beyond. My room is more comfortable than I expected, with a writing desk positioned beneath a window that faces away from the mountain. I noted this curious arrangement immediately, but held my tongue. Only later, when I moved the desk to better capture the morning light, did Mrs. Holloway's lips press into a thin line. By evening, the desk had been returned to its original position, while I took supper. A coincidence, perhaps, but I think not. I stood at the window and studied the mountain. It seemed to dominate the landscape, pulling the clouds around its summit like a magnet. I remembered when I asked the stagecoach driver about it. He informed me it was called Devil's Peak, and it would be in my best interest to avoid it entirely. That evening during dinner, I asked Mrs. Holloway about the mountain, hoping to get more information about it, to which she changed the subject. When I innocently asked if there were any trails to its base, she broke the teacup she was holding, even as she whispered something about the mountain behaved differently. Then she looked straight at me and gave me a warning. People who near the peak become unstuck from proper time. Before I could ask her what she meant by that confusing comment, she picked up my half-filled plate and rushed to the kitchen, leaving me alone at the dining table. September 5, 1893. Today marked my first day at the schoolhouse, a simple but solid structure situated conspicuously on the side of town furthest from Devil's Peak. 12 students of varying ages greeted me with shy curiosity. Their names are now committed to memory: Timothy and Elizabeth Halloran, the 3 Wilson children, John, Peter, and young Sarah, Mary and William Fletcher, Catherine and Thomas Green, James Harper, and the Miller twins, Rebecca and Samuel. The morning proceeded with standard assessments of their educational progress, revealing competent basic instruction from my predecessor. We had just begun geography lessons when the incident occurred. The classroom fell silent so abruptly, I turned from the blackboard, certain some mischief was underway. Instead, I found all 12 children motionless, their faces turned toward the eastern windows, expressions blank, yet somehow attentive. For nearly 30 seconds, not one of them blinked or shifted position. When the spell broke, and I can think of no better term, they returned to their studies as though nothing had happened. When I casually inquired about their momentary distraction, little Sarah Wilson replied simply, "The mountain was calling." The other children hushed her immediately, and no amount of gentle questioning elicited further explanation. I have since observed that none of the children will approach the eastern windows voluntarily. When I asked John to open them for fresh air, he obeyed with evident reluctance, stretching to reach the latches from as far away as possible. Most curious is their ritual of touching the doorframe before entering the schoolhouse each morning, a brief press of fingers against the wooden lintel, performed with such naturalness that I believe they are entirely unaware of the habit. September 12, 1893. Evidence mounts that something beyond the ordinary pervades this place. The schoolhouse itself appears to possess peculiar qualities I cannot explain through rational means. 3 times this week, I arranged my teaching materials precisely before departing, only to find them in slightly different positions the following morning. The slate I left with mathematical figures was discovered, wiped clean and bearing a rudimentary drawing of the mountain. The children denied any after-hours visits, and I believe them. The fear in young Rebecca's eyes when she saw the drawing seemed genuine. More unsettling are the temperature fluctuations within the building. Yesterday afternoon, while reviewing composition exercises, the room grew so cold that our breath fogged visibly before us. This was despite bright sunshine and mild autumn weather just beyond the windows. The chill lasted precisely 7 minutes before dissipating as inexplicably as it had arrived. Throughout this phenomenon, the children exchanged knowing glances but offered no comment. Most disquieting is the persistent sense of being observed. I've lost count of the times I've turned sharply, certain someone had entered the classroom, only to find empty air. The sensation is strongest near the eastern wall, where faint sounds occasionally emanate, much like soft scratchings and what might be whispers just below the threshold of comprehension. September 18, 1893. I gathered my courage this evening and approached Mrs. Holloway regarding the local superstitions. She was mending by lamplight when I inquired, as casually as I could manage, about Devil's Peak and its peculiar reputation. Her needle paused mid-stitch, and though her expression remained placid, I noted the tightening of her fingers upon the fabric. Her response was disappointingly circumspect. "Some believe time bends near Devil's Peak," she said after considerable hesitation. "The mountain keeps its own counsel, and wise folks don't ask its secrets." I pressed further, mentioning the children's behavior and the strange occurrences at the schoolhouse. Mrs. Holloway's countenance grew troubled. She advised me, not unkindly, but with unmistakable firmness, that certain topics were best left unexplored by newcomers. When I protested that as the teacher, I needed to understand matters affecting my students, she conceded only that the mountain had always been that way, and that the townspeople had learned to live alongside its peculiarities. Before retiring, she placed a small leather pouch on the table beside me. "Keep this with you at the schoolhouse," she instructed. "It helps." She would not elaborate on what help the pouch, containing what appeared to be dried herbs and small metallic objects, might provide, but I noticed her eyes flicking toward Devil's Peak through the window before she withdrew. September 24, 1893. Catastrophe nearly struck today. I remained at the schoolhouse later than usual, preparing materials for our harvest lessons. So absorbed was I in my work that I failed to note the gathering storm until thunder shook the very foundations of the building. When I attempted to leave, the wind nearly tore the door from my grasp, and sheets of frigid rain made the path into town treacherously slick. With darkness falling rapidly and the storm intensifying, I reluctantly decided to remain overnight. The schoolhouse took on an entirely different character in the darkness. Shadows appeared to move independently of my lamp's light, and the persistent sensation of unseen presences intensified tenfold. I arranged a makeshift bed from classroom cushions and wrapped myself in my shawl, the leather pouch Mrs. Holloway had given me clutched tightly in my palm. I must have drifted into uneasy sleep, for I was startled awake by a brilliant flash that seemed to emanate not from the storm outside, but from the mountain itself. Through the eastern windows, strange lights danced across Devil's Peak. It was not lightning, but organized patterns of illumination that pulsed with deliberate rhythm. As I watched, transfixed, the lights coalesced into what appeared to be a doorway of pure brilliance halfway up the mountainside. More alarming still were the voices that began to filter through the empty classroom. I could hear whispered fragments of conversation from unseen speakers. I distinctly heard a child's laugh, a woman's urgent warning, and most disconcertingly, what sounded like my own voice, reciting a poem I have never read. These auditory phantoms persisted for nearly an hour, ebbing and flowing with the intensity of the lights on the mountainside. When silence finally returned, I found myself drawn to the teacher's desk. Some instinct I cannot explain led me to run my fingers along its underside, where I discovered a subtle irregularity in the wood. Careful pressure revealed a hidden spring mechanism that, when triggered, opened a small compartment built into the desk structure. Within lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. The inscription on the first page reads, "The account of Miss Emily Barrow, schoolmistress, 1843." 50 years ago, before this town was properly established, if local histories are accurate. With trembling fingers, I began to read by lamplight. The script detailed experiences eerily similar to my own. Unexplained phenomena centered around the schoolhouse and the mountain, reluctant townsfolk, and children exhibiting identical behaviors to my own students. Most chilling was her description of lights upon the mountainside and voices from empty rooms during an autumn storm. The final entry is dated October 31, 1843. It reads simply, "I understand now. The mountain does not merely bend time. It breaks it entirely. Heaven help me. I can see through." The remainder of the journal's pages are blank, as though Miss Barrow's chronicle was abruptly abandoned. I find myself wondering with considerable unease what revelation led her to cease her documentation, and what fate befell this predecessor whose existence no one has mentioned. As dawn broke and the storm cleared, I replaced the journal in its hiding place. I have resolved to transcribe its contents in full within these pages, but more importantly, to discover what became of Emily Barrow. Something significant transpires in Timber Creek, centered around that imposing peak. Despite Mrs. Holloway's warning, I cannot in good conscience ignore these mysteries, not when they affect the children under my care. Devil's Peak may keep its counsel, but I am determined it shall eventually yield its secrets to me. Part 2. Meeting the Blacksmith. From the Journal of Miss Adelaide Thornfield, October 18th, 1893. Timber Creek has been abuzz with talk of the new blacksmith these past 3 days. After old Mr. Jenkins retired suddenly last month, citing worsening rheumatism, though I suspect the strange occurrences near his shop played a larger role, the arrival of a replacement has injected fresh energy into our small community. I confess I paid little attention to the gossip until fate arranged our meeting in the most unexpected circumstances. The incident occurred yesterday morning as I traveled to the schoolhouse. The wagon I had hired, my usual conveyance being unavailable, suffered a broken wheel not half a mile from town. The driver, young Peter Wilson's father, examined the damage with visible dismay, declaring it would take considerable time to return to town for repairs. With classes due to begin within the hour, I prepared to continue on foot when a tall figure appeared around the bend. I knew immediately this must be the much-discussed Mr. Barrow. His appearance alone would command attention in any setting. He stood well over 6 feet, with shoulders broadened by his trade, yet moved with surprising grace for a man of his stature. What caught my attention more thoroughly, however, was his immediate assessment of our predicament. Without preamble or unnecessary conversation, he examined the wheel, produced tools from a leather satchel, and set about implementing a temporary repair that would allow us to continue safely. His hands fascinated me. They were powerful from his blacksmith's work, yet displayed exceptional dexterity with the smaller components. More telling was his methodical approach, each movement precise and economical. This was no ordinary frontier tradesman, but a man of considerable education, applying himself to practical matters. When he glanced up momentarily, I caught the full impact of eyes so intensely blue they seemed almost luminous against his sun-darkened face. Our proper introduction came only after the wheel was secured. "Ethan Barrow," he stated simply, offering a brief nod rather than the customary handshake. I noted a slight hesitation before he added "Blacksmith," as though the title were newly acquired or somehow insufficient. His speech bore no particular regional accent I could place, yet certain inflections suggested refinement beyond what one typically encounters in these remote territories. As we resumed our journey, Mr. Barrow having declined our offer of transportation, I mentioned to Mr. Wilson the remarkable lights I had observed on Devil's Peak during the recent storm. His reaction proved most curious, a momentary stillness, followed by an overly casual inquiry about precisely when and where I had witnessed this phenomenon. His affected nonchalance could not disguise the keen interest in his gaze, nor the way his fingers unconsciously moved to touch a peculiar timepiece partially visible in his waistcoat pocket. October 21, 1893. Mr. Barrow appeared at the schoolhouse this afternoon, with the intent to deliver the repaired window fixtures that had been damaged in last month's windstorm. I observed him closely as he worked, noting several peculiarities that continue to intrigue me. His tools, while superficially similar to those used by other craftsmen, contain subtle differences in design and composition. The metal itself had an unusual luster, and the techniques he employed seemed to achieve results beyond what I had previously observed in similar work. When I inquired about his distinctive approach, he provided an explanation involving metallurgical principles that sounded more appropriate to a university lecture than a frontier workshop. Most remarkable was his pocket watch, glimpsed briefly when he checked the time before departing. Unlike any timepiece I have encountered, it appeared to contain multiple dials and intricate mechanisms, visible through a partially transparent casing. When I expressed admiration for its craftsmanship, he quickly secreted it away, claiming it was merely an experimental design of no particular significance. His manner of speech occasionally betrayed him as well. Twice he employed phrases that seemed oddly out of context, then quickly redirected our conversation. More telling was his extensive knowledge regarding subjects far removed from blacksmithing. When our discussion turned to recent scientific publications, prompted by a volume of Scientific American I had left on my desk, he displayed familiarity with theories and discoveries I believed were known only in academic circles. Most suspicious was his abrupt departure, when several students returned unexpectedly to retrieve forgotten items. The children regarded him with open curiosity, particularly Timothy Halloran, who studied Mr. Barrow with unsettling intensity. I cannot escape the impression that Mr. Barrow's arrival in Timber Creek was somehow connected to the peculiarities surrounding Devil's Peak. October 25, 1893. The strange incidents have accelerated at an alarming rate these past days. This morning, while collecting arithmetic exercises, I discovered a drawing created by young Sarah Wilson. The crude yet strangely compelling illustration depicted several figures moving through what appeared to be a glowing doorway set into the mountainside of Devil's Peak. When questioned about her inspiration, Sarah became uncharacteristically reticent, claiming only that she had seen it in her dreams. The similarity to the phenomenon I witnessed during the storm cannot be coincidental. More disturbing still was yesterday's incident with the classroom timepiece. The pendulum clock, which has operated reliably since my arrival, suddenly began moving in reverse during our afternoon geography lesson. For nearly 7 minutes, the hands rotated counterclockwise at an accelerated speed before abruptly returning to normal function. The children appeared far less alarmed than the situation warranted, several exchanging knowing glances as though this occurrence merely confirmed their private understanding. Perhaps most unsettling is the precise appearance of 3 identical ravens outside the eastern windows each afternoon at exactly 3:17. They arrive in perfect formation, perch on the same 3 fence posts, and observe our classroom activities with unnatural attentiveness for exactly 9 minutes before departing in unison. Their synchronized behavior suggested purpose rather than coincidence, though I cannot begin to imagine what intelligence might direct such creatures with such precision. I have taken to carrying Emily Barrow's journal with me, comparing her observations from 50 years past with current events. The parallels grow increasingly undeniable, though her account suggests the phenomena were less frequent and intense during her tenure. Something has changed, or is changing, with accelerating momentum. October 30, 1893. Today's incident has removed any lingering doubts regarding the supernatural nature of our circumstances. During afternoon recitation, as Rebecca Miller read aloud from McGuffey's Third Reader, a profound alteration occurred within the classroom. The quality of light shifted dramatically, daylight fading to darkness in the span of moments. Stars became visible through the windows, though the schoolhouse clock still showed 1:42 in the afternoon. The transformation lasted perhaps 30 seconds, during which the children's recitations faltered and several of the younger students began to whimper in distress. As suddenly as it had appeared, the nighttime vista vanished, daylight returning with jarring abruptness. In the aftermath, as I attempted to calm the frightened children, the schoolhouse door opened to reveal Mr. Barrow on the threshold. His unexpected appearance might have seemed coincidental, had he not been visibly winded, as though having run some distance. More telling was the strange device clutched in his hand. He held a brass instrument resembling a compass, but with additional components I could not identify. His gaze swept the room as if to make sure the children were okay before landing finally on me with an expression that conveyed both concern and calculation. When the children had been dismissed early, a decision I made, to their understandable anxiety, Mr. Barrow remained and began to secure loose shutters that still needed repair. Our conversation, while circumspect on both sides, revealed his extensive knowledge of geology, astronomy, and particularly physics. These were subjects in which he showed expertise far beyond what his profession would suggest. I observed him, studying the mountain, through what appeared to be scientific instruments from a leather case he guarded most carefully. When I approached quietly, I glimpsed complex mechanisms and papers covered with mathematical calculations before he secured them from view. His reluctance to share his observations only strengthened my suspicion that he knew far more about Devil's Peak's peculiar properties than anyone else in Timber Creek. I find myself looking forward to my conversations with Ethan with an eagerness that surprises me. Mr. Barrow invited me to call him by his given name, and, though I knew it wasn't entirely proper, I reciprocated, allowing him to call me Addie, a name only my father had used. Then he smiled at me, which seemed to cause a tingle that traveled clear to my toes. I admit only in this diary that his company brings me unexpected joy, even if our association is justified through scholarly inquiry. I tell myself it is merely the pleasure of finding an intellectual equal in this remote place, but I cannot deny the quickening of my pulse whenever I see him. November 2nd, 1893. Nature herself conspired to force our mutual confidences this evening. An unseasonable blizzard descended with shocking rapidity. Fortunately, the children had earlier been excused, and I was completing some cleanup and preparations for the next day's lessons. In my worried state as the storm intensified, Ethan appeared at the schoolhouse, bearing supplies from town and news that the road had become impassable. We found ourselves stranded together, facing the necessity of securing the building against increasingly violent weather. As we worked to shutter windows and reinforce the door against the howling wind, a moment of profound significance occurred. Reaching simultaneously for a fallen timber, our hands touched. A casual contact that under normal circumstances would merit no mention. What transpired, however, was anything but ordinary. A visible spark of energy passed between us, blue-white and crackling with tangible force. The sensation, neither painful nor precisely pleasant, resonated through my entire being, leaving an impression of connection that transcended mere physical contact. Ethan's reaction confirmed the experience was mutual. For the first time since our acquaintance began, his carefully maintained composure faltered completely. The look that passed between us contained recognition, wonder, and maybe a bit of confusion. In the aftermath of this inexplicable moment, with the storm raging around our shelter, pretense became suddenly impossible to maintain. I revealed my discovery of Emily Barrow's journal, watching closely for his reaction to the name. Though he controlled his expression admirably, the slight tensing of his shoulders betrayed significance. His response, while not a full confession, revealed volumes through careful omission. He acknowledged awareness of the mountain's unusual properties and admitted his presence in Timber Creek was not mere coincidence. His studies, he explained, involved theoretical principles that intersected with Devil's Peak's unique characteristics. What he conspicuously avoided was any explanation of his personal connection to these phenomena or the true nature of his scientific pursuit. As we huddled near the stove through the long hours of darkness, the storm's ferocity increased. Twice the building seemed to shift around us. Not from wind damage, but as though the very substance of the schoolhouse temporarily occupied multiple positions simultaneously. During these alarming moments, Ethan consulted his strange timepiece with intense concentration. We parted at dawn as the storm abated, having established a fragile understanding based more on mutual recognition of the extraordinary than actual disclosure. Ethan asked me to promise that I would alert him immediately should any significant phenomena occur, particularly any recurrence of the temporal shift experienced by my students. I find myself in the curious position of having confirmed that something truly inexplicable surrounds Devil's Peak, while simultaneously acquiring a potential ally who remains himself the greatest mystery of all. The coincidence of his surname matching that in the hidden journal cannot be dismissed, yet I hesitate to draw conclusions without further evidence. One certainty emerges from yesterday's experiences. Ethan Barrow's presence in Timber Creek is intimately connected to the mountain's secrets, and our paths have converged in ways that cannot be attributed to mere chance. The energy that passed between us suggests forces at work beyond conventional understanding, forces that may prove either enlightening or dangerous as winter closes around our isolated community. Part 3. Mounting Strange Events. From the Journal of Miss Adelaide Thornfield, November 30th, 1893. The early winter has enclosed Timber Creek in a blanket of isolation, the heavy snowfall rendering the mountain pass impassable until spring thaw. Our small community is turned inward, as frontier settlements must during these months of confinement. Yet while others find the seclusion oppressive, I have discovered an unexpected liberation in these circumstances, and that is the freedom to pursue investigations that would raise eyebrows in more populated areas, and the opportunity to further my acquaintance with the most enigmatic resident of our township. Ethan has proven himself an invaluable research partner. Following the November blizzard, we established a pattern of regular meetings, ostensibly to document and analyze the increasingly frequent anomalies surrounding Devil's Peak. What began as a scientific collaboration, however, has evolved into something far more complex and personally significant. I find myself anticipating our sessions with unseemly eagerness, having prepared notes and observations with meticulous care, not solely for their scientific merit, but also to earn his thoughtful consideration. His mind works unlike any I have encountered, approaching problems through multiple analytical frameworks simultaneously, connecting seemingly disparate elements into coherent theory. When focused on a particular question, he demonstrates both brilliant insight and endearing obliviousness to his surroundings, occasionally continuing a point mid-sentence after minutes of silent contemplation as though no pause had occurred. More disarming still is the gradual revelation of his character beyond intellectual capacity. Beneath his reserved demeanor lies both gentle strength and unexpected vulnerability. I have observed his careful interactions with the school children, particularly young Timothy Halloran, whose scientific curiosity Ethan nurtures with remarkable patience. Yet I have also witnessed moments of profound loneliness in his unguarded expressions, a sense of displacement that resonates with my own feelings of existing somewhat apart from the community around us. December 7th, 1893. Our documentation of anomalies has grown extensive enough to require a dedicated cataloging system. The phenomena have diversified in both frequency and nature, suggesting an acceleration that correlates with the winter solstice's approach. Most prevalent are the object manifestations. Items appeared in locations where they previously did not exist, and often bore characteristics inconsistent with current manufacturing methods. Yesterday I discovered a peculiar mechanical pencil on my desk, constructed of materials I cannot identify, and featuring an internal mechanism for advancing the lead without manual sharpening. When I showed the item to Ethan, his reaction betrayed recognition before he carefully composed his features into scientific interest. The landscape alterations have become more pronounced as well. Twice this week, gazing from the schoolhouse window, I witnessed the terrain transform momentarily into configurations both familiar and foreign. In one instance, the forest receded entirely, replaced by open prairie as it might have appeared centuries earlier. More disturbing was yesterday's vision of the same location, occupied by structures of unimaginable design. I saw angular buildings of glass and metal that vanished when I blinked, leaving me to question my sanity until Ethan confirmed experiencing similar glimpses of what he carefully termed potential landscape variations. Most scientifically significant, according to Ethan, is the behavior of certain metals in proximity to the mountain. He has demonstrated how gold and iron respond differently to natural magnetism when within a specific radius of Devil's Peak. His instruments, which he now openly uses in my presence, measure variations in what he calls temporal resistance, which is a concept he explains in terms that are beyond my scientific understanding. December 12, 1893. Last evening marked a turning point in our relationship that I can scarcely bring myself to record, despite this journal's private nature. We had extended our research session in the schoolhouse well past prudent hours, the lantern creating an intimate circle of light around my desk, where we examined Ethan's detailed mappings of anomaly patterns across the region. The intellectual excitement of discovery, combined with our physical proximity as we leaned over the same documents, created an atmosphere of such intensity that I found myself responding to impulses entirely inappropriate for a schoolteacher of proper standing. When Ethan looked up from his calculations, his face mere inches from mine, illuminated by lantern light that transformed his eyes to an impossible shade of blue, I committed the unthinkable. I closed the distance between us with a kiss. What followed confounds my understanding even more than the supernatural events we investigate. for precious moments. Ethan responded with equal passion, his hesitation dissolving into an embrace that suggested profound longing. Yet almost immediately he pulled away, conflict evident in every feature. His expression revealed not rejection, but something far more complicated. It was a war between desire and what appeared to be ethical constraint. He departed hastily, leaving my apologies unanswered. This morning, I discovered a note slipped beneath my door, containing not the recrimination I feared, but rather a carefully worded reassurance that his abrupt exit reflected personal complexity rather than disapproval of my actions. The precise phrasing, temporal considerations, complicated matters between us, struck me as a peculiar choice of words, reinforcing my suspicion that Ethan's secrets extend beyond scientific interest in Devil's Peak's phenomena. December 18, 1893. The paranormal events reached unprecedented intensity today, affecting the entire school during morning lessons. Without warning, the quality of light through the windows altered dramatically, accompanied by a disorienting sensation of movement, despite the building remaining physically stationary. The landscape visible outside transformed completely. The familiar snow-covered schoolyard was replaced by a muddy clearing, surrounded by half-constructed buildings. Most shocking was the appearance of unfamiliar figures moving about this transformed environment. They were dressed in clothing styles I could not place as either contemporary or historical. For approximately 47 seconds, timed by Ethan's strange watch when he examined my detailed recounting, the schoolhouse, and all within it, appeared to occupy a different time period entirely. The children's reactions proved most revealing. While the younger students panicked, several older children, particularly Timothy Halloran, displayed recognition rather than surprise. Their familiarity with the phenomenon suggests these temporal displacements have occurred previously, perhaps witnessed privately by residents who chose not to discuss such inexplicable events. Ethan arrived at the schoolhouse with unprecedented haste following the incident, despite having no reasonable way of knowing what had transpired. When I questioned about this timely appearance, he finally relented to share partial truths. He has, he admitted, been studying temporal phenomena for years. His research has led him specifically to Devil's Peak, where theoretical calculations suggested that a natural thinning between timeframes might be accessible. His instruments detect these anomalies, allowing him to monitor fluctuations from his workshop. While this confession explained his scientific interest, it left unaddressed the personal connection I increasingly suspect exists between Ethan Barrow and the journal of Emily Barrow from 50 years past. Even more troubling was his warning that the frequency and intensity of these events would likely increase as we approached the winter solstice, reaching potentially dangerous levels during the celestial alignment due in 2 days' time. December 20, 1893. I have survived an ordeal that nearly claimed my life, emerging with both gratitude and greater certainty that my fate is somehow entwined with Ethan's and the mountain's mysteries. The incident began shortly after dusk, when I observed an unusual configuration of lights on Devil's Peak. They were not the aurora-like manifestations previously documented, but precise formations that suggested deliberate arrangement. Despite the heavy snowfall and Ethan's explicit warnings about independent investigation, I succumbed to curiosity and set out toward the phenomenon, believing I could reach the foothills and return before the storm intensified. My miscalculation became apparent within the hour. The swirling snow obliterated familiar landmarks, while the mountain lights shifted position in ways that defied navigation. Disoriented and increasingly aware of the dropping temperature's danger, I struggled forward until exhaustion and cold overcame my determination. My last clear memory was of sinking into snow, consciousness fading as the light seemed to approach rather than recede. I awoke to movement, and then being carried through the blizzard in Ethan's arms, his face set in grim determination as he navigated the treacherous terrain with impossible confidence despite near-zero visibility. My questions about how he had located me went unanswered, as he focused entirely on reaching shelter, a cave entrance I never would have discovered independently, set into the mountainside and marked with symbols that matched those in Emily Barrow's journal sketches. The cave interior defied expectations, extending deep into the mountain with evidence of long habitation. Primitive pictographs covered sections of the walls, depicting what appeared to be figures moving between separated worlds through a mountain doorway. More recent markings included dates spanning centuries, some annotated with initials and brief notations in various languages. Most remarkable was a section of polished stone that responded to Ethan's touch by emitting soft blue illumination, revealing detailed equations and diagrams etched into the surface. Though he attempted to shield these revelations from my observation, his need to verify our location within the cave system necessitated consulting these markings, allowing me glimpses of information that confirmed my growing suspicions about both the mountain's nature and Ethan's connection to it. As we huddled near the small fire he constructed, physical necessity overwhelmed social propriety. Survival required shared warmth, resulting in an intimacy of circumstance that broke down remaining barriers between us. In that vulnerable state, with death so recently averted and the mountain's secrets literally surrounding us, emotional honesty became inevitable. Ethan's admission, while still circumspect regarding specific details, confirmed the essential truth I had begun to suspect. His connection to this place transcended contemporary understanding. The pain evident in his expression as he spoke of violations of natural order and responsibility to maintain temporal integrity revealed a man torn between scientific ethics and personal desires. My own confession matched his in emotional significance, if not supernatural complexity. I acknowledged that my interest had grown far beyond scientific curiosity or casual respect. Despite the brevity of our acquaintance by conventional standards, the intensity of our shared experiences had fostered feelings I could neither deny nor easily categorize. Their connection between us, culminating in tentative declarations of deep feeling, now exists alongside the unresolved mystery of Ethan's true origins and the nature of Devil's Peak's temporal anomalies. As the storm finally abated near dawn, allowing our return to town, we reached an understanding, although there were no formal commitments beyond agreement to face whatever revelations awaited us together rather than separately. Mrs. Holloway received my snow-covered return with remarkable equanimity, her only comment being that the mountain chooses its confidants carefully. Her knowing gaze as she glanced between Ethan and myself suggested awareness beyond what either of us had explicitly revealed. Tomorrow brings the winter solstice, which Ethan predicts will trigger unprecedented temporal activity centered on Devil's Peak. We have agreed to combine our documentation, his scientific measurements, and my observational records, in preparation for whatever manifestation occurs. Though apprehension colors my anticipation, I cannot deny the exhilaration of standing at the threshold of discovery, with a companion whose mysteries intrigue me as deeply as the mountain's own secrets. Part 4, Discovery. From the joint documentation of Adelaide Thornfield and Ethan Barrow, January 17, 1894. The ice storm descended upon Timber Creek 3 days ago, with a ferocity that rendered all previous winter hardships trivial by comparison. Trees bent near breaking beneath crystalline weight, telegraph lines collapsed entirely, and even the sturdiest structures groaned under the relentless accumulation. Our isolation has become absolute. No communication was possible with neighboring settlements. No travel was feasible beyond basic necessities. In this forced seclusion, time itself seems suspended, creating an appropriate atmosphere for the revelations that had transformed my understanding of both Devil's Peak and the man with whom I have become inextricably connected. Ethan arrived at my lodgings as the storm intensified, bearing not only provisions, but the entirety of his research materials that he had previously guarded with such secrecy. Mrs. Holloway, displaying her uncanny prescience, prepared the parlor for our use without comment, stocking the fireplace abundantly before retiring to her rooms upstairs. Her parting glance conveyed both warning and blessing. It was as if she knew that boundaries would be crossed, in multiple senses, during the coming hours. With meteorological isolation mirroring our intellectual separation from conventional understanding, we combined our respective documentation of my observational records and historical findings with Ethan's scientific measurements and theoretical models. The synthesis produced immediate insights, patterns emerging that had remained obscured while our work proceeded independently. The temporal anomalies followed mathematical progressions too precise for coincidence, increasing in both frequency and intensity according to astronomical movements and geological alignments specific to Devil's Peak's position. Near midnight, as ice pellets struck the windows with percussive insistence, our research yielded a schematic representation of what Ethan termed temporal thinning, and which he explained as points where the barriers between different time frames weakened sufficiently to permit passage. The geometric precision of this pattern, combined with notable historical incidents recorded in Emily Barrow's journal and town records, revealed something unprecedented. They were not random anomalies, but a functioning portal, opening fully during specific celestial configurations. It was this revelation that finally elicited Ethan's complete truth. January 18, 1894. The confession that emerged from Ethan's lips as the mantel clock struck 12 rendered all previous mysteries trivial by comparison. He is not from this time at all. Ethan Barrow, the man I have come to trust and care for deeply, was born in 1897 and lived his early life in the 20th century. His presence in our era resulted from accidental passage through the portal in 1923 during an expedition to study unusual magnetic phenomena reported on Devil's Peak. The evidence supporting this impossible claim accumulated with devastating clarity as he unpacked previously concealed items from a locked case. He showed me photographs, printed through techniques unknown in our time, scientific instruments displaying precision beyond current manufacturing capabilities, and newspapers dated decades into the future, yellowed with age, yet describing events that have not yet occurred. Most convincing was his knowledge of historical developments no contemporary person could possibly predict, including scientific advances that explain anomalies we have observed. My initial reaction combined intellectual fascination with profound personal betrayal. Every interaction between us now required reinterpretation, such as his careful avoidance of certain topics, his occasionally anachronistic phrases, and his superior scientific understanding. For hours, I maintained emotional distance while processing this revelation, focusing instead on the scientific implications, while struggling to reconcile the man I had come to care for with this stranger from another time. Yet as the night progressed and our work continued, despite personal turmoil, Ethan's essential character remained unmistakably consistent. The same intelligence, ethical concern, and gentle strength that had drawn me to him were not fabrications but fundamental aspects of his being, regardless of temporal origin. By dawn, scientific necessity had overcome personal conflict, allowing us to progress toward understanding the portal's mechanics while leaving emotional ramifications temporarily unresolved. January 19, 1894. Our breakthrough regarding the portal's functionality came with disturbing implications. Analysis of astronomical tables and historical records revealed that the portal opens fully only during specific alignments, with the next occurrence mere days away on January 23rd. More alarming was our discovery that the increasing frequency of temporal disturbances indicated growing instability in the portal's structure. Each manifestation weakened the boundaries between timeframes and potentially threatened Timber Creek's existence across multiple timelines if left unchecked. Ethan's future knowledge provided crucial context that similar temporal anomalies had been documented in 1923, with catastrophic consequences when a research team attempted improper manipulation of the portal. Their actions destabilized the temporal field completely, resulting in a localized disaster that his expedition had sought to understand scientifically. His accidental passage through time had resulted from that investigation gone awry. The mathematics we derived suggested a terrifying possibility, that Ethan's unintended journey might itself be contributing to the very disaster he had originally investigated, creating a causality loop with potentially devastating consequences. Stabilization would require intervention during the coming alignment, with precisely calibrated actions at the portal's nexus point high on Devil's Peak. Our theorizing was interrupted when Mrs. Holloway entered with fresh coffee, surveying our exhausted figures and scattered research with knowing eyes. Her cryptic observation that some barrows always find their way back to the mountain suggested knowledge extending far beyond what she had previously revealed. When questioned directly, she acknowledged what we had begun to suspect. Emily Barrow had not disappeared 50 years ago, but had herself traveled through the portal, leaving behind the journal as both warning and guide for those who would follow. January 20, 1894. Our continued research faced dramatic interruption this afternoon when the schoolhouse became the epicenter of a temporal storm, unlike any previously documented. Having relocated our work there to access additional historical records stored in the building, we found ourselves witnessing the most severe manifestation yet of the portal's growing instability. The event began with subtle temperature fluctuations and electromagnetic disturbances affecting Ethan's instruments. Within minutes, the disruption intensified as objects from various eras materialized and vanished throughout the classroom. A brass telescope of futuristic design appeared briefly atop my desk. Ancient Native American tools scattered across the floor before dissolving into nothingness. A mechanical device Ethan identified as a radio from his own era, manifested with sufficient solidity for him to examine it briefly before it, too, disappeared. More alarming were the ghostly figures that flickered into partial existence. They looked like transparent human forms moving through the space, as though occupying the schoolhouse in different times. Some appeared dressed in historical attire from the early 1800s. Others wore clothing styles Ethan identified as contemporary to his own era. Most disturbing were several figures in unfamiliar garments he could not place within his known historical framework, suggesting temporal displacement extending beyond even his future knowledge. The manifestation reached crisis level when several of my students, who had unfortunately arrived seeking shelter from the severe weather, became endangered by the phenomenon. Young Timothy Halloran, whose sensitivity to the anomalies had been previously noted, was nearly pulled into a swirling temporal rift that opened near the eastern windows. The vortex, resembling nothing so much as a hole torn in the fabric of reality itself, exerted powerful attractive force on anything in proximity. Ethan's response revealed both his true character and the extent of his scientific understanding. Without hesitation, he secured himself with a rope anchored to the building's central support beam and entered the distortion field. The physics, he rapidly explained, while preparing this intervention involved counteracting the temporal pull by introducing an object, himself, already displaced from its proper time frame. His theory proved correct, as his presence disrupted the rift's stability sufficiently for him to reach Timothy and pull him to safety before the vortex collapsed upon itself. The incident, witnessed by both the children and several townspeople who had gathered outside the schoolhouse upon noticing the strange illumination emanating from its windows, effectively eliminated any possibility of maintaining secrecy regarding the portal's existence. Sheriff Mackenzie, demonstrating unexpected adaptability, quickly organized the onlookers into a support team, following Ethan's instructions to secure the building's perimeter with specific metal components that help stabilize the temporal field. January 22, 1894. After extensive calculations and testing of various theoretical models, we faced an unavoidable conclusion regarding the portal stabilization. Someone must calibrate the magnetic resonance from both sides simultaneously during the coming alignment, meaning one of us would need to return to 1923 while the other remained in the present era. The scientific necessity created an impossible personal choice: separation across time, or risking catastrophic temporal collapse that could destroy Timber Creek in multiple timeframes. The technical aspects of the stabilization process require precisely timed adjustments to a device Ethan has constructed from components both contemporary and futuristic. One individual must position the primary resonator at the portal's nexus point on the mountain's northern face, while another establishes the corresponding field generator at the same geographical location, but 30 years forward in time. The procedure demands not only technical precision, but perfect synchronization across the temporal divide, a virtually impossible coordination unless attempted by individuals with profound connection, transcending ordinary temporal constraints. Our debate regarding who should return to 1923 continued through hours of increasingly emotional discussion. Ethan's argument centered on his responsibility to return to his proper time, preventing further temporal contamination. My counter-argument emphasized his superior knowledge of future technologies required for proper calibration, and the impossibility of my adapting to a future era without preparation. As night descended and the alignment drew nearer, we acknowledged that our deliberation had transcended purely scientific considerations. The connection between us, intellectual, emotional, and increasingly spiritual, had developed into something neither of us had anticipated or sought, yet which now seemed as fundamental to our existence as the physical laws governing the portal itself. In a small cabin near the mountain's base, where we had established our equipment for the coming intervention, we finally surrendered to the feelings that had grown between us. With the understanding that tomorrow might bring permanent separation, We consummated our love with both desperation and tenderness. The electricity that had passed between us during our first physical contact now manifested as something more profound. It was a sense of temporal alignment that transcended the mechanics of the portal we sought to stabilize. In the stillness afterward, watching moonlight filter through ice-crusted windows, we experienced a simultaneous realization. The mathematical models we had developed to explain the portal's mechanics had consistently included an unidentified variable, an element our equations required, but which neither of us had been able to define or measure. What if that variable represented not a physical component, but the temporal resonance created by human connection across time frames? The profound bond between us might itself be the stabilizing force the portal required. Tomorrow brings the alignment that will test this theory. We have prepared 2 sets of equipment, each of us ready to travel or remain as circumstances dictate. The townspeople, now aware of the basic situation, if not its full complexity, have agreed to maintain distance from the mountain during the critical hours. I write this joint entry in our research documentation with scientific detachment, but my private thoughts remain turbulent. I have fallen in love with a man from another time, and within hours, we will determine whether that love represents the solution to temporal instability or the sacrifice required to prevent catastrophe. The woman who arrived in Timber Creek seeking merely independence and purpose now stands at the threshold of discoveries that challenge the fundamental nature of time itself. Whatever tomorrow brings, I am no longer merely observing extraordinary events. I have become an integral component of them. We must now face the ultimate test of our research and our hearts. Part 5. Beyond Time Itself. Final journal entries of Adelaide Thornfield and Ethan Barrow. February 2nd, 1894. The morning of January 23rd arrived with unexpected serenity. The storm that had encased Timber Creek in ice for days dissipated during the night, leaving behind a crystalline landscape that transformed the mundane into the extraordinary. Every branch, fence post, and telegraph wire glittered with frozen precision, creating a world that seemed suspended between moments, an appropriate setting for the decision we had reached in the quiet hours before dawn. After our night together, the revelation came not as a flash of insight, but as a gradual understanding that seemed to have existed all along, merely awaiting recognition. Our mathematical models had consistently indicated that the destabilization occurred due to single empty passage through the portal. What if the solution wasn't preventing crossing, but ensuring connected crossing? The unidentified variable in our equations might represent not a physical component, but the quantum entanglement created by profound human connection, and what poets call love, and scientists might one day recognize as temporal resonance between consciousnesses. The decision surprised us both in its clarity and unanimity. Neither of us would stay behind. We would traverse the portal together during the alignment, using our connection as both the stabilizing mechanism and the protection against the disorienting effects of temporal displacement. The risk remained substantial, but our calculations suggested 2 individuals bound by genuine emotional entanglement might safely navigate the passage while simultaneously sealing the instability their combined crossing created. January 24th, 1894. The preparations proceeded with methodical focus despite the emotional undercurrents tugging at us both. While Ethan finalized the calibration of our transit devices, I organized comprehensive records of our discoveries, theories, and supporting evidence. These documents would remain in Timber Creek, preserving knowledge that might prove crucial should the portal manifest activity in future generations. Mrs. Holloway received these records with knowing composure that finally gave way to revelation. Her family, she explained, had served as guardians of information about the portal for generations. Emily Barrow, Ethan's great-aunt, in his original timeline, had indeed traversed the portal 50 years earlier, but unlike Ethan, her crossing had been intentional. She had left her journal deliberately, knowing it would eventually reach someone capable of understanding its significance. Mrs. Holloway herself was descended from Emily's sister, making her Ethan's distant relative across time, a connection that explained her immediate recognition of him upon his arrival in Timber Creek. This genealogical revelation provided final confirmation of our theories about temporal resonance between blood relations. Emily's crossing had created the initial instability, which weakened further when Ethan, sharing her bloodline, inadvertently traveled through. Our calculations suggested that the portal required balancing, not by preventing passage, but by completing a pattern of crossings that would stabilize the temporal field permanently. The townspeople, having witnessed the events at the schoolhouse, now gathered with surprising acceptance of our explanations. Sheriff Mackenzie organized volunteers to patrol the mountain's base, ensuring no curious onlookers would approach the nexus point during the critical hours. Reverend Hollister, after initial theological confusion, found unexpected harmony between spiritual and scientific understanding of transcendent connections. Most touching was the response of my students. Having been informed that their teacher would depart, though the full temporal implications remained beyond their comprehension, they arrived at Mrs. Holloway's house bearing a handmade quilt they had secretly created under her supervision. Each square contained embroidered constellations and astronomical symbols representing the alignment that would facilitate our journey. Timothy Halloran, whose sensitivity to temporal phenomena had manifested throughout our investigations, solemnly informed me that the quilt would wrap time around us for protection. January 25th, 1894. The alignment reached its peak precisely at 3:17 this afternoon, according to Ethan's calculations. We departed Mrs. Holloway's house at noon, allowing sufficient time to reach the portal's nexus point on Devil's Peak's northern face. The journey through ice-laden forest proceeded in reverent silence, each of us absorbed in our thoughts, while maintaining physical connection through clasped hands. The portal's manifestation began gradually. It was first visible as subtle distortions in the air, like heat waves rising from summer ground despite the winter cold. As we approached the coordinates specified in our calculations, these distortions intensified, coalescing into a shimmering curtain of energy that rippled with colors beyond conventional description. Ethan's instruments registered unprecedented readings, confirming that the alignment had created optimal conditions for crossing. We positioned ourselves before this temporal veil, ensuring our transit devices were properly calibrated and synchronized. The physical preparation complete, what remained transcended scientific protocol. Our research had indicated that successful crossing required absolute synchronization, not merely of our instruments, but of our consciousness. There was a unified intention and complete trust that would bind us throughout the disorienting passage. The transition defies adequate description, though I must attempt it for the sake of scientific documentation. Imagine simultaneously experiencing all physical states of matter: solid, liquid, gas, and something beyond conventional classification. Throughout this overwhelming sensory chaos, one sensation remained constant. Ethan's hand clasped firmly in mine, our connection serving as an anchor point within temporal flux. The theories we had developed about emotional entanglement creating stability proved fundamentally correct, though the mechanism functioned not through the detached physics we had hypothesized, but through something more profound. What poets call love, we experienced as literal tethering across time's disruption. April 18, 1924. It has been 14 months since Ethan and I stepped through the shimmering veil on Devil's Peak. And sometimes I still wake, startled, to find myself in this world of electric lights and motor cars. Yet, when Ethan's arms encircle me in those moments of disorientation, I know with absolute certainty that I am precisely where I belong. Today marks our first anniversary. Our wedding was small but perfect, held in the garden of Ethan's family home with cherry blossoms drifting down like snow. His parents, who had mourned him as lost forever, still look at me with wonder sometimes. The woman who brought our son back from beyond, his mother, calls me, though she cannot know how literally true that statement is. We've told only a carefully edited version of our story to most, though Ethan's closest scientific colleagues know more of the truth. Their initial skepticism has given way to cautious belief, as our documented evidence proved impossible to dismiss. The weather-beaten journal I brought with me, the one that once belonged to Emily Barrow, now sits in a glass case at the university's special collections. I smile each time I visit it, knowing that Emily was Ethan's great aunt, the connection between our timelines stronger than either of us could have imagined. Time is not a straight line, but a tapestry, with threads that sometimes loop back upon themselves. May 30th, 1924. Our home is taking shape at last. Ethan insisted on building much of the furniture himself, despite the ready availability of store-bought pieces in this era. A blacksmith doesn't forget his trade. He tells me with that crooked smile that still makes my heart flutter. His workshop behind our cottage is filled with a curious blend of 1890s tools and modern innovations. Yesterday, I found him teaching a neighborhood boy how to temper steel, using techniques from both centuries, the child's eyes wide with admiration. I miss my students sometimes. Teaching 30 children of all ages in one room had its challenges, but there was a beautiful simplicity to it. The college has offered me a position teaching literature beginning this autumn, but it will be strange to instruct adults instead of watching young minds blossom. Still, I am grateful for the opportunity. Women professors remain uncommon enough that my appointment has raised eyebrows. When we walk through town together, Ethan proudly holding my arm, I notice how different this world is for women. My ankle-length skirts draw curious glances among the fashionable shorter hemlines, though I've adapted somewhat to modern styles. I still find myself shocked at women smoking cigarettes in public or driving automobiles alone, though I admit the latter skill is one I'm eager to master. August 12th, 1924. I've discovered something miraculous today, something that explains the persistent fatigue and morning sickness I've been experiencing. Dr. Matthews confirms I am with child, approximately 3 months along. When I told Ethan this evening, he lifted me into his arms and spun me around our sitting room, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "A child," he kept whispering, "our child." Later, as we sat together on the porch swing watching fireflies rise from the garden, Ethan confessed something that broke my heart. During those months in Timber Creek, before he revealed his true identity to me, he had resigned himself to a life of solitude. Even if he found a way back to his time, he believed the experience had changed him too fundamentally to ever truly belong anywhere again. "You gave me more than love, Addie," he said, his hand resting gently on my still flat stomach. "You gave me a future I never thought possible." I wonder sometimes about the mathematics of our child, a life conceived between two people from different centuries. Will our baby inherit Ethan's brilliant mind for physics or my love of literature? Perhaps both, a bridge between science and art, just as we are a bridge between times. October 3rd, 1924. The university has granted Ethan tenure based on his revolutionary theories in quantum physics. His colleagues remain unaware that his insights come partly from having experienced temporal displacement firsthand. The papers we published together on theoretical aspects of time dilation have drawn attention from scientists as far away as Germany and Japan. With my pregnancy advancing, I've postponed my teaching position, though I continue to write. My series of short stories, based on folklore from Montana Territory, has found a publisher, carefully disguised versions of the true temporal phenomena I witnessed. Ethan teases me that I'm becoming the Timber Creek historian across time. We've begun decorating the nursery. Ethan has built a cradle with his own hands, its wood carved with constellations, matching those on the quilt my students gave me. That quilt remains our most treasured possession, a tangible connection to the place and people who brought us together. I spread it over the cradle today and felt a curious warmth emanate from its stitches, as though the love woven into it transcends the decades. December 24th, 1924. Christmas Eve, and snow falls gently outside our windows, not unlike the blizzards of Timber Creek, though less ferocious here in the valley. Ethan has filled our home with pine boughs and candles, insisting we blend traditions from both our timelines. The electric lights on our small tree still seem magical to me, though I prefer the warm glow of candles. My belly now swells prominently beneath my dresses. The child is active, especially at night, kicking and turning as though eager to begin exploring this world. Ethan falls asleep each night with his hand resting protectively over our baby, sometimes whispering explanations of temporal physics, as though preparing our child for extraordinary understanding. We received a peculiar visitor yesterday, a physicist from England who had read our papers and traveled specifically to meet us. Over tea, he asked questions that suggested he knew more about temporal displacement than any outsider should. When I mentioned Devil's Peak casually, watching his reaction, his eyes widened almost imperceptibly. I suspect he may have encountered a temporal thinning elsewhere, though he didn't confide in us. Ethan has invited him to return after the holidays. There is comfort in knowing we may not be the only ones who understand the true nature of time. February 15th, 1925. Our daughter arrived in the early hours of February 13th, after a difficult but ultimately successful labor. We've named her Adelaide Thornfield Blackwood, honoring both our family lines and the woman whose journal first led me to investigate Devil's Peak. She has Ethan's startling blue eyes and, I fancy, my determination. She fought her way into this world with remarkable vigor for one so small. The doctor and nurses commented on her unusual alertness, how she seems to observe everything with uncommon focus for a newborn. Ethan is transformed by fatherhood. The brilliant scientist who once calculated temporal equations with cool precision now spends hours simply watching our daughter breathe, counting her tiny fingers and toes as though they contain the mysteries of the universe. Perhaps they do. Last night, I caught him showing Emily star charts, pointing out the very constellations that were aligned when we crossed through time together. "Your existence defies every law of probability," he whispered to her. "You are our miracle." April 30th, 1925. A remarkable discovery today. As I was knitting a blanket for Emily beside her cradle, I unfolded the constellation quilt to tuck around her for her afternoon nap. As the fabric settled over her, a newspaper that Ethan had left nearby caught my attention. Specifically, an article about Montana folklore. There, in black and white, was a story about Timber Creek and a legend that had apparently persisted for decades. A tale of a schoolteacher and a blacksmith who vanished during a winter storm, believed by locals to have been taken by time itself. According to the article, the town's schoolhouse now bears a plaque commemorating Adelaide Thornfield and Ethan Blackwood, whose love transcended time. My hands trembled so badly I could hardly finish reading. The article mentioned that generations of Timber Creek residents have reported occasional sightings of us near Devil's Peak during certain astronomical alignments, though we have never returned to that exact time. It mentioned Mrs. Holloway preserving our research and teaching successive school teachers about the temporal properties of the mountain. When Ethan returned home and I showed him the article, he sat beside me in stunned silence. Then he pulled out his calculations, the ones tracking the portal stability patterns, and made a startling suggestion. What if we could visit Timber Creek again? Not in 1893, but perhaps in other years, when the portal aligns. The possibility leaves me breathless. To see what became of my students, to thank Mrs. Holloway for her guardianship of our story, I hardly dare hope. September 3rd, 1925. Emily took her first steps today, toddling determinedly from the sofa to my waiting arms. Ethan insists her accelerated development must be connected to her unique temporal heritage, though I remind him that mothers have believed their children exceptional since time immemorial. I have begun sketching plans for the Thornfield Blackwood Foundation, an organization dedicated to researching temporal phenomena while protecting sites like Devil's Peak from exploitation. There are other locations with similar properties, Ethan believes, places where time thins periodically. Our work could help prevent accidental displacements while advancing understanding of temporal physics. As I watch my husband teaching our daughter to identify constellations in the evening sky, I reflect on the extraordinary journey that brought us here. From a schoolteacher stepping off a stagecoach in Montana territory to a woman who literally walked through time for love. My life has transcended all conventional boundaries. The quilt for my students now hangs on our wall, a daily reminder that connections formed in one time can sustain across another. I sometimes press my palm against it and whisper thanks to the children who made it, hoping somehow they sense that their teacher found happiness. Love, I have learned, is the one force powerful enough to bend time itself. And our story, the schoolteacher and the blacksmith who loved across time, continues to unfold in ways I never could have imagined when I first glimpsed Devil's Peak through a stagecoach window and felt my destiny change course. Some bonds, as we have proven both scientifically and personally, truly exist beyond time itself.